teachers of Reddit, what student will you never forget? I teach violin to people of all ages. My youngest students are barely 2 years old. My oldest are at retirement homes and can't remember when they were born. My very first student, let's call her Kelly, was amazing. She wasn't a prodigy or anything, but she tried incredibly hard, every single day, without fail, every lesson. Her mother would take pages and pages of notes, and her little brothers would sit at her feet, watching their sister play. At only 8 years old, this kid showed more effort and understanding of the importance of work than most adults I've met. She showed up 5 minutes early to every lesson, and practiced 45 minutes a day. She advanced consistently, and she was always ready and eager to learn. Anytime I asked her to do something, she would just do it. Anytime I asked her not to do something, she would stop doing that thing, and she would never do that thing again. Kelly was, in every way, the perfect student. And then, I was applying for grad schools, and jobs, and other work, and it was a lot of stress. I spoke with Kelly's mom while Kelly was packing up after her lesson, and told the mom about the most stressful part, my reputation. I was worried, because I wasn't the best student, and I was relying on some of my most critical teachers for my recommendation letters and referrals, and I wasn't sure of their potential remarks on me. Kelly's mom told me that my CV was probably enough. She was sure I'd be okay. A week passed, and Kelly came in for her lesson. 5 minutes early, only. This time, she had a little white envelope with her. She handed the envelope to me, and said, "I heard you talking about how you needed a recommendation letter. So I asked my mom to help me write one for you." I opened the envelope, and there, on white ruled paper in thick pencil, was the sweetest recommendation letter I've ever received. She talked about how much she loved lessons, how good of a teacher I am, and she even provided specific examples of my best qualities. The letter was 5 pages long, and signed with her full name in wobbly cursive. All in all, it was the most touching letter I have ever received. It's because of Kelly's letter that I was afforded the opportunities I have pursued. It's because of her kindness and sense of duty, even after she knew I would be leaving her, as I was leaving college, that I ended up becoming a teacher as my main gig. It's because of Kelly that I'm a teacher, and I will be forever grateful for that child's words. One of my students told me as a child she wanted to grow up to be a strawberry, and then cried when she realized she couldn't, because she was a human being. Very sweet girl. I've had many students that are still taking a large place in my heart. Some are sad, like the girl whose mother started beating her during a parent conference. I started crying and begged the mother to stop. The student who had no water or electricity at home, but we allowed him to shower at school and we washed his clothes. The student who watched his grandparents get murdered by his mother and wrote about it in an essay for my class. The student who had never been in a lake that we took camping. He was so excited but didn't know how to swim, so he just stood in the water up to his neck and grinned. Lovely. The girl with terrible anxiety that I sat with for hours after school to work on schoolwork, not because she wasn't smart, but because she was so anxious about not being perfect. The girl who was mauled by a dog with a messed up face, but she always smiled. The girl whose father brought her to school every day late who finally broke down and told me her father was raping her every day when the mother left to go to work. The Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees who flooded my school after the war. One wrote an essay about running towards a boat and seeing his grandfather get shot, but he had to keep running. The Brazilian boy who got up in class and got me to start dancing with him while we all laughed joyfully. The group of students I took outside during their first snowstorm. The wonder on their faces was priceless. The student who found me on Facebook after 20 years to tell me I made a difference in her life. She came to my state and took me to dinner and told me I was there for her when her home life was terrible. I had no idea. I'm just kind to everyone. I have a million more stories. I have loved every student, and being able to teach has been an honor. When I was student teaching English classes, I had this one girl who completely lied and obviously spark noted the plot for Lord of the Flies. She would clearly cheat with it on the test. but for some reason made the mistake of thinking Peggy's name was Peggy, and I will never forget her page-long essay about how Peggy was the only girl on the island and the BS plot points she added to go with it. I nearly died when I was grading it. The one who told me, "You really make me think." We are friends to this day and have the best conversations. It's the highest compliment for a teacher. I was a water sports instructor teaching people kayaking and canoeing a couple years back. There was a group of refugees, all minors between 11 to 17, that came to us through a charity that was supporting them gaining asylum in my country, UK. All of them had crossed the channel on a raft or dinghy literally 2 days before, and for some goddamn reason the charity had decided it was a good time to take them canoeing. Can't make this shit up. There was this one kid from South Sudan, 15 years old and an absolute behemoth. We are talking 6 foot plus and pushing 14 to 15 stone in weight, covered in scars, some of them ritualistic scarification, missing teeth and generally just looking like he'd been through hell many times. He was terrified of the water. I took him in my boat, nice and easy. Then once he got comfortable, I just stuck a stern rudder in and let him power us through the water. Him and the other kids loved it. We had some tears at the beginning. I imagine there was a lot of PTSD involved judging by the state of some of these poor kids. At the end of the session, this giant monster of a child walked up to me with a huge jagged grin, said in broken English, "Thank you, leader," and gave me a bear hug I'll never forget. To this day, 4 years later, I still remember that grin. Kid named Felix. He was a huge brat, always getting detentions and never handing in work. Somehow I was able to connect with him, and he actually behaved in my classes. The reason I'll never forget him, my partner worked at the same school, and one day he sent me to work with a black eye. None of my colleagues said anything about it, and I felt like in their silence they were taking his side and condoning his actions. Felix was the only individual in the entire school who saw me and asked, "Miss, what happened to your face? Are you okay?" I will never forget Michael. He came from a different country at the age of 2. It took him months to open up to me, but I was patient with him, and it paid off. We had an unbreakable bond. We would do art projects together. We would play. I learned his native language so I could better communicate with him. He opened a new level of love and joy into my life. As a teacher, I have to admit that in large classes, the good students often get forgotten about. The simple fact is that the bad students take a lot more effort than those students who just innately understand the information I'm teaching. If I'm teaching a smaller class, the opposite is true. I notice the good students because they are good, and the bad students because they need more help. That said, when a student is extremely exceptional, I take notice. I had a student named Redacted who was the most exceptional student I've ever had. She not only aced literally every assignment I ever handed out, but she also got perfects on every test. Now, it's normal to have very good students who do very well, high as on every test, but not perfect scores. However, it wasn't just because she was intelligent. She was one of those students who came in regularly for help with homework. That said, she rarely had anything wrong. She just wanted confirmation that her thinking was correct. To this day I still use her lab reports as examples of how to write a lab report. Apostrophe. The most exciting thing for me, as a professor of science, is students who show the initiative of thinking outside the box. Science isn't about memorizing things. It's not really about the math, although that is how we test in the sciences. Science is about learning to ask the right questions. If you know how to ask the right questions, then you will make a great scientist because, believe it or not, figuring out which experiments to do is much more difficult than doing the experiments. When students ask the right questions, I get excited. Oftentimes, depending on the level of class, the right questions can be simple. Something like, if A is true and B is true, does that mean C is also true? That may seem silly to you and me, but the younger students I teach don't really think like that yet. They haven't learned to think critically. Thinking critically is taking what you know and asking questions that are plausible, then taking the answers to those questions, if those answers exist, and modifying your questions. So many. Madison, who had a beautiful smile, A few years after graduation she was murdered by her boyfriend, a classmate of hers. This shattered me. Tony, who had at and I seated right in front of me. He made me crazy and charmed his way into my heart both at the same time. He liked my class but not science, and that was fine. Travis, who was a nice kid in school but is now a real leader in his community. Stephanie, who pursued a career in chemistry and said it was because I inspired her. Sarah, who called me the night she was suicidal. She's now one semester from being a social worker. Dustin, from my first year, who was living on his own and needed lunch money half the time. He's a dad and husband now and doing great. Hallie, who put a ton of pressure on herself and was in tears in my class after school. A couple conversations with her dad later, and I think maybe a family crisis was averted. She's with the Peace Corps now. Bill, who did as much as needed to make a C in my class, and no more, who has a PhD in mathematics and is a data scientist. He was bored. M, whose name is distinct, so I'm only using his initial. Blew off school from January to March for unknown reasons. Kicked it into high gear for the last quarter and final, but still ended with a 59 F. It cost me nothing to nudge that to a 60, so he could have the credit and graduate. He knew and thanked me. Kid's doing well now. Justin, who had a major falling out with a journalism teacher and couldn't get anybody to listen to his side of things. He teed for me during that double period after dropping her class. He's a dad and successful reporter. Super nice guy. It's not that these are any more or less remarkable than anyone else. We just forged a relationship and I'm so grateful to have shared a small bit of their lives. The thing I miss most about being in the classroom is the kids. Not a teacher, but when I was in the 8th grade we had a little buddy in kindergarten where we accompanied them to church. It was a Catholic school and also did learning/fun activities with them a few days of the week for a period. I got this little blonde-haired kid with glasses named Jess, and he was quite the handful. He didn't really seem to get along with the other kids and was always acting out. At first he was tough to try and keep in line, especially at church. But after a while he seemed to take a real liking to me and started listening. We started getting along great and had a lot of fun drawing/coloring and reading together. One day I got to meet his mom before school started. She handed me a present. It was the latest Harry Potter book and thanked me for being such a great buddy to Jess. Apparently his dad left them and he took it really hard, which was why he was always acting out. She said that she noticed a change and thinks that me being so nice to him had a lot to do with it because he would talk about me to her. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.